massacred her name there, I forget that. But she is a young woman, is she still here? Who, thank you, hi.
She's going to be on the panel.
Oh great, she's going to be on the panel, so you'll hear more from her. But she talked about how important it was for her when she was faced with deployment orders, and she knew she didn't want to go to that war, she knew it was wrong, she knew she had better things to do in her life, how important it was for her the fact that she was able to network with other veterans, including Iraq veterans, including Veterans for Peace, find people that really supported her, let her know what her options were. So with a lot of support and a bit of luck, she was able to, even after going AWOL and refusing to deploy, she was able to get another than honorable discharge. So that can be, it just points out the real importance of providing information. That's one of the things we can do is provide our own experience, provide our support, and provide information to people who are facing these difficult choices today, the people who are on active duty. We talked about, what is a resistor? What's a war resistor? The definition seems to have expanded and evolved as the movement has evolved in recent months and years. We started out, we had public war resistors, people who were courageous enough to take a public stand and refuse to deploy to Iraq, and a number of whom went to prison, like Kevin Benderman, who spent 15 months here at Fort Lewis, Stockade, like Camilo Mejia, who did a year in prison, like Lieutenant Aaron Matada, who continues to struggle. He has not been convicted, but he's also not been released from the military. He has an ongoing, very difficult struggle at Fort Lewis and continues to need our support. Then the conscience objectors and others who are, many who have ended up AWOL, over 10,000 at least over the last 5 years, have been classified as deserters. If you were just counting AWOLs, probably hundreds of thousands. Because that's just, you're late for work, you're AWOL. I know, I've been there. So, but I was also gone for 6 years at one point, so more than being late for work, I guess. But at any rate, I work with war resistors in Canada specifically, so it's an ongoing struggle there. We're going to show a film about that tonight, Breaking Ranks. And the point I want to make is it's the 200 to 300 AWOLs that are currently in Canada are facing a very difficult legal and political battle to remain there, to have a sanctuary in Canada. And that's a struggle that we need to continue to support. And I mentioned the Courage to Resist website as an excellent way for people to lend their voices to that campaign for sanctuary. The House of Commons in Canada will be voting in probably 2 weeks on a motion calling on the government to allow war resistors to immigrate, and we can add our voices to that campaign. We'll talk more about that later. Canada is just one option, probably not the best option for most people, but it's important to know that yes, you can still go to Canada if that's what you decide to do, and you'll find a lot of support there. Most of the AWOLs are AWOL in the United States, and so it's very significant that a number of communities are both formally and informally starting sanctuary campaigns. We're running out of time here? Okay, I haven't got to my main point. Basically, the definition of resistor has really evolved into one of the GIs who are organizing dissent within the military today, both using their legal options within the military to organize dissent and educate their fellow soldiers without even putting themselves in legal jeopardy, as well as those who are refusing orders. The most important thing that Veterans for Peace and the anti-war movement can do at this time is support Iraq veterans against the war and others who are reaching out to the active duty GIs. Let them know that we're there for them. And in that vein, there was continuing discussion about the possibility of supporting a GI coffee house at Fort Lewis. So I think that about does it for now.
Extra piece there. One on the bottom. Okay, I believe that we've gone through the workshops. It says here that we have a panel discussion starting right like 10 minutes ago, so we'll get that set up real quick and continue on from there.
Thanks, last night what we're really committed to is giving whoever's going to do it next year the best possible jump start on that. So we're going to ask you to complete a survey, and we're going to do that after the panel and before dinner, before the ptomaine poisoning kicks in. Anyway, so just be thinking about that. It's got two sides. It's kind of long, and that's because we want to give lots of information to the folks that are doing this next year, as was given to us by Joseph. One thing that I was thinking about, a lot of photographs being taken. We didn't have anybody that was specifically tasked with that, but if any of you photographers have photos that you think are good, we'd be really grateful if you email to any of our chapter contacts here, so that we can use them in future presentations and in the national newsletter and that sort of thing. And one last editorial thought. One thing that we might consider doing, this is a little bit in retrospect, but as some of you know, Chapter 72's Dan Shea ran for election to the board of Veterans for Peace this year and was not elected. But I'll bet you if we have another candidate before the board and we can get a real solidarity among the Northwest chapters, we can have representation on the national board. Just a thought. Congratulations, Dan, on leading us there. Another little item here. The Corvallis chapter has very generously brought some stuff that some of you may wind up wanting to use. It's the latest thing in activist wear. And the Corvallis chapter got these for an action that they had, but Leah and her chapter are making them available to anybody else who would like to use them for their own action.
I had to order 50 of these. They're made out of this like heavy paper. They're supposed to be disposable, but if you treat them nicely, they over you. And they're one size fits all, and it goes over clothes and stuff. You can roll up the sleeves, they zip in the front, and then we made these black shirts, and they're really striking for for visual effect. Yeah. I have some pictures in our binder of our actions. But I have some extra ones that if people will
And if you haven't heard Dwight's story about people wearing those in the state capitol in Idaho, it's a good story. Okay, we're going to go offline for a minute.
The workshops today, I know it shows up as a theme in our discussions within our chapter, is that there is a persistent pattern about warfare that seems to have a generational component, which is a really euphemistic way of saying that, with the exception of Adriana down there, the median age in this room is somewhere upwards of 50. And veterans of the current conflict are really not represented, and we do not currently have a lasting and meaningful relationship with large numbers of those vets. This is certainly a concern because we include them in the target audience of many of the things that we do. Some of this is pretty understandable because, you know, every conflict has its changes in technology. Our culture, you know, outside of warfare changes over time. You know, what happened between World War I and the war in which Ed served? Well, one thing that happened was antibiotics, which changed the entire picture, right? And there are many, many other details like that. So what we propose to examine in the next 55 minutes or so is some of the questions based on our own experience, some of the things that may contribute to building those barriers that many of us, most recently Jerry, talked about between the veterans of one war and the veterans of another. I would like to propose that we have a ground rule in our discussions here. I suspect that we have all been engaged in many, many conversations about that were really speculation about why we don't have the Iraq and Afghan warriors here with us, and we really gain very little by that. So I would suggest that we avoid things that are speculative in nature and instead spend this most of an hour examining our own experiences from World War I or World War II onward, to look for some of the sources and maybe some of the answers as far as eliminating those barriers that we erect, it seems, each time there's a major conflict. So, having said that, I'm going to pose questions and let these fine people talk. My first question, and really this is, maybe we'll start with Ed on the left and let it move on as it will. There was something, I think we all feel that there was something unique about the period in which we served that created that barrier between the earlier vets and what we might consider our war. You know, somehow it seems like our fathers and our uncles and the rest of the previous generation couldn't really understand the facts of our war. So I'd like to hear what those you know, what created those barriers between earlier vets and you.
But the most important point I can make, I guess, is that I was drafted in 1942 after being deferred for 3 years as a chemistry major. I was at the University of California at Berkeley, and I was the last person drafted in the draft board there. After I left, they closed the draft board. There was no other male left on the campus who was not in the services. After about 6 weeks at Camp Barkley, I was offered a position in the Army Specialized Training Program, which I turned down because I wanted to go to medical school, but they wanted me to be a combat engineer, and I said no. So my punishment for that was I was sent to the front, where they found out I was a lab technician and promptly assigned me to a general hospital instead of the combat troops that I had come over the ocean with. Our first job was a remnant of World War I. All the medical kits that were issued to the infantrymen they had 2 syringes of morphine, and the officers in Washington in the medical corps were all older men. All the doctors at the front were young doctors who had been drafted like I was, and most of the medics were young like I was. I was just 22 then. And they were objecting to the fact that they had these ampoules of morphine, And so we spent about a month in a big quartermaster depot in Liverpool throwing away these ampules morphine. And then they found out I could speak German, so they sent me to a German prison camp where I was promptly put in the hospital. And then I would move to medical headquarters so we could build hospitals in preparation for the invasion. And I spent a year and a half as a supervisor of the building of hospitals. I had no previous experience in building, but in the military meant nothing. I'm proud to say that the English bricklayers were very good, and they very cheerfully paid no attention to our orders, and they built according to their own ideas, and so those are still standing. And all the rest of my experience then, I went down to Dartmouth, where I served the troops being loaded onto the landing craft for a month, and those poor devils were on those small landing crafts for a month, and the only way off of it was if you collapsed, and then I would come along in the morning and the afternoon, and I would certify then who was to go to a hospital. And those unlucky people went into the hospitals, which, as you probably know, were very dangerous places.
Because there was no morphine. Your head threw it away.
Well, our building of the hospitals on the coast proved to be pointless because the troops were very good about avoiding being shot. They were very adept at hiding, and the Army was very distressed when they found out that most soldiers at the end of the war had not fired their rifles in combat. They were very unhappy.
And when you returned from your service, did you feel kinship with the older generation that had been in World War I?
No. I was offered a membership in the American Legion, which I turned down, and we joined the American Veterans Committee in Berkeley, which was the original chapter of the AVC. And it was then renovated out of existence. And as a socialist, I was, of course, very prominent in the police files in Berkeley.
So you started out with a great deal not really in common
Right.
with the guys that fought the war to end all wars.
No.
You know, I always wondered if there was some lingering resentment about that. They were supposed to have kept you from having to fight that war.
Well, most of the people that we saw in the American Legion or the Veterans of Foreign Wars were older men who had served in the United States but not Europe. In the American Legion, in the Veterans of Foreign Wars, they had to be at least in England, and a few of them were in France. Whereas in the AVC, and most of the people I knew, we had all been overseas for, well, I served 3.5 years overseas. I was frozen because I could speak German, and I was assigned to the Army of Occupation.
Thank you. I think we'll move a little bit up in history. It's probably true that a fair number of people that you served with, Bill, had served in World War II?
Yeah, we call them retreads. They were these guys had joined the reserves and were called up to give us basic training and show us the ropes. And I got drafted in January of 1951. My brother was a year younger than me. He got drafted the next month. So my mom had two sons at home at Christmas time, but by Easter they were both gone. Both wound up in the Far East. FECOM, which was a word that struck fear in the heart of every GI. But on my way to FECOM, I wound up down in Nevada at the test site to observe a series of nuclear bombs that were exploded, and this was a series of tests called Buster Jangle. And the largest bomb that I saw exploded was 32 kilotons. The bomb that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki were both around 12 to 13 kilotons. So what the Army was doing in Nevada was determining whether psychologically or physiologically the troops could continue to fight having been exposed to a tactical nuclear weapon. But this was going to be done with animals. They had some pigs and some sheep and they were going to give us a report. Didn't happen. I never got the report. I came back from Korea, and I kind of kept an eye on what was going on politically in Korea. And we had put into office a man by the name of Syngman Rhee as president in Korea, and he was one awful son of a bitch. And this pattern continued to this day. You know, we put that guy in Vietnam, what was his name, Diem? We put him in office. We dragged him out of the United States. He'd been in exile for a long time. Syngman Rhee had been in the United States for 30 years or so before we dragged him over and put him in office in Korea. Then what did we do in where was I? Which war was I? Korea. And now in Vietnam, we put that guy Diem in power, and now we're in Iraq attempting to put another puppet in power, or to give a puppet some substance or military backup. And so I detect a pattern of things taking place is to divide the country, put in a puppet that is amenable to your requests, and anybody that thinks that we're in Iraq to bring them democracy is crazy. It just ain't so. And to hear that nitwit in the White House say that democracy is on the move. On the march, yeah. So when I was watching what was going on in Korea after I came home, the government that we had put in place didn't like what the radical students were doing in Daegu. So they sent the Rock Army down there, shot a few of them radical students, made believers out of them. They put the Army to work breaking strikes. You know, the Hyundai shipyards were struck, and the Army went in and put an end to the strike. And those are the kind of governments that we've supported through the period of time I've been on this earth. It's almost 80 years now. And you know, there is such a common theme that runs through this, and we have a lot in common. I was offered, you know, the American Legion and the VFW when I came home. They wanted me to join, and I didn't really want to have anything to do with it because their primary purpose, it seemed to me, was to sit around the bar and tell war stories. So I've been at anti-nuclear and anti-war protests. When I moved to Portland, I said, I lived in Butte, Montana then. When I moved to Portland, I said, I'm not going to get involved in this. And sure as hell, I'm parading in the streets. My wife is pulling my youngest child in his radio flyer with the peace symbols, and it's been that way ever since.
So it sounds like in your case that the relationship with the veterans groups and the veterans establishment, if you will, was you had already parted company with that way of thinking as it was. But it sounds to me also that the term retread was not entirely respectful and affectionate.
No, they even accepted it though. They knew what they were there. They didn't want to be there. They just didn't want to be there. And so when the term retread was kind of a badge of honor, I guess, because the first sergeant in my company was a retread. Ornery bastards.
Moving forward in history, what, I guess another 15 years or so. So I guess there were retreads in Vietnam.
Yeah.
From the previous two conflicts.
Yeah. I guess we just called them lifers, but and they probably weren't all lifers, but basically the question is, for someone coming back from Vietnam, how did I relate with the older generations?
Right.
Sort of?
Yeah, we sense that there are some barriers
Yeah.
in their credibility with the returning vets.
Yeah. Well, for my situation, you know, my father was a World War II vet who hadn't gone overseas. He hadn't seen combat because he was young enough that he basically kind of missed out on it and just got drafted right towards the end of the war. So our situations were totally different because I did go to combat, but he and I, we never got along as far as talking about the war, because he was very gung-ho. Everything that, you know, that the country did was right, and, you know, he loved Richard Nixon. And so I remember getting into a very heated argument with my father about, you know, about the fact that Vietnam was not a good war. No wars are. So that was kind of my perspective of trying to deal with my own father, and I just never, I never was an active, to this day I've never gone into a VFW or any of those kind of things, and I basically went underground for 25, almost 30 years. I'm married to a Vietnam veteran, and we basically hid out in the hills of the Ozarks for several years, and never really wanted to be part of any veteran organization, never wanted to do anything until, I'd have to say basically for me that what got me to be active, and I say that very loosely because I am a semi-active veteran for peace, was George Bush and the latest fiasco in Iraq. That was kind of my last straw. It was kind of my undoing with thinking that I was dealing with post-traumatic stress for almost 30 years, and it was that war that just was my undoing and made me become active and made me start wanting to talk about my feelings about war. And so basically, that answered your question.
It did. I want to refer back to Ed and Bill just for a second, though, because of what you said about lots of people came home from Vietnam really turned their back on the whole experience and tried to continue on living their lives without reference to having had that experience. Did both of you sense that's what happened after those two wars?
Well, in my case, I was very active politically as a socialist in Berkeley, where there were a lot of socialists at the university. And so I'm not a good judge of that, actually.
Thanks for your honesty.
My war was the first war we lost. That's the kind of reception that we got. They used to have in Seattle, when one of the port of embarkation was in Seattle and one was in San Francisco. In Seattle, when the ship came back with what was left of the ship that went over, the can-can girls would be out on the dock to greet the soldiers. And the Blue Noses in Seattle said, "You can't do that. You're going to corrupt those guys." Being stuck in a place like Korea wasn't bad enough to corrupt a person, but those can-can girls were. So I made as little reference to the war as I could. I didn't want to be any part of the damn war. When I got sent to Korea, when I was assigned to a water supply company that was just being formed, and as a PFC, I was low man on the totem pole, and so I was elected to go to the colonel, battalion commander, as soldier of the month. So I put on a Class A uniform, and I go up to the colonel, and the colonel's sitting there, and we go through all the formalities, and the colonel asked me a bunch of silly questions about what's the muzzle speed of the bullet coming out of the M1 carbine, and what's your serial number, and all that kind of junk. And then he said to me, "Soldier, what is your ambition in the Army?" I said, "Colonel, my ambition is to get out of the Army." And I mean that sincerely. And about 3 days later, my name was on the bulletin board for troop movement. FECOM, I was gone. Korea?
There's an interesting cultural shift that is now beginning to happen as we move forward in time, which is that Bill said that's the first war we lost. I'm not sure whether you characterize Vietnam that way at all, because it wasn't a war either. So
Losers.
So we got a brief intermission, and then we sent Sean Lewis and his Patriot battery to do the same thing again. So now we've got, a generation ahead. And what were the barriers like for you?
My story really is one of generations. Military family, several generations in a row. Every U.S. conflict back to the Revolution, and then even military family back in the old country before that. I'm happy to say my daughters have no intention of continuing the family tradition. My oldest daughter 2 years ago told a recruiter, "Look at him, no way." But my dad was one of those lifers, served at the tail end of Korea, and then 3 tours in Nam. Retired in '78 when I was 12 years old. I never knew my grandfather because, he died of PTSD in 1951. My father died of Agent Orange exposure about 6 months after I went in. And I was still there, and I was still proud to be there. And then the Cold War ended. We needed a new enemy. We found one. And we started bombing the living shit out of Iraq in 1991. An interesting thing about generations, I do remember when my father came back from Vietnam the last time, when I was 3. The times before that, I was too young to recall anything. My dad we lived 22 miles off base down in Southern California. And my dad worked in Blues when he was stateside. But he drove to work in civvies. This was an 18-year-old NCO, or 18-year NCO, that was driving to work in civvies in 1976, changing into his uniform and changing back into civvies before driving home in the evening. And a lot of that was the response that Vietnam vets got. A lot of that was by reputation only, and a lot of that was the way our government treated them, honestly. My father was actually denied entry into the VFW because Vietnam was not a declared war, nor Korea. And my dad was nearly dead by the time he got any disability benefits from the VA. And in fact, it wasn't until 10 years after his death that the VA and the Pentagon acknowledged the link between the illness that killed him and Agent Orange. Which of course leaves me wondering what my kids are going to find out 10 years after my death. But when we went into that conflict in January 1991, I do remember front pages of the Stars and Stripes, January 15th. There was an article to the soldiers written by Generals Powell and Schwarzkopf. I don't remember the entire article, but I do remember a couple of paragraphs where they told us to be prepared for a 13-month conflict. 13 months. And now if you time that out, that would have brought us up to February 1992, right at the beginning of the primary season. Just want to mention that. A few things happened 6 weeks later. One, I was on guard duty in a foxhole when some other privates came out with 4 inches of cover and some sandbags for my foxhole, which had been open top the entire time. I was like, oh, finally, thank you. And they're like, yeah, the war's over. Schwarzkopf's coming through in a week. What? And I said, well, it's over. Didn't make much sense to me. We had the understanding that the goal, when I say we, I'm talking about the troops on the ground in 1991. We had the intention, or at least we thought that the order was regime change at that time. So I was really surprised when we stopped at the border. Then I found out, oh, that wasn't the agreement we had with our allies. And I think it was 3rd Armor or 5th Armor was like 100 miles from Baghdad at that point before they finally turned around. And I said, we're going to be back. The U.S. is not going to leave this alone. We accomplished the mission that our allies had commissioned us to do, which was get Iraq the hell out of Kuwait. But we're going to be back. So after 6 weeks of that, and then several weeks doing humanitarian missions into northern Iraq and things like that, finally got back home to Germany to my pregnant wife and my child, and then finally got back stateside about 6 months after that. I couldn't believe it. I mean, we were getting ticker tape parades like we had just downed Hitler. The response was just, the emotional response of the American people was just unbelievable. Until I started to put it in context of, frankly, the guilt that I felt that the American people had over the treatment of Vietnam vets. I'm very fortunate that I was the beneficiary of the backlash from that. Because things happened in my favor. I was able to get my VA claim settled in less than 2 years by act of Congress. There was enough outpouring of public emotion that I was actually able to see the hollowness of it, and the hollowness of the goddamn yellow ribbons, and the hollowness of people standing in airports handing teddy bears to returning troops. It's like, yeah, that's really where my dysphoria started. But that was relating to the Vietnam generation. And I actually felt apologetic to the Vietnam generation because I was getting the kind of treatment that they deserved after that long, arduous war, multiple tours, and everything that they had gone through. And I was only there for 6 weeks. My war lasted, I think, 48 days, 49 days, something like that.
So it's sounding to me like your generation felt a certain affinity rather than a barrier.
A sympathy for it anyway.
The previous generation.
You know, there was also, I mean, we had lifers too, and I mean, you know, we had my first sergeant, my battalion sergeant major, you know, my platoon sergeant even were Vietnam vets. And in a lot of ways, we felt like, well, some of us, I shouldn't say all, you know, but some of us actually felt guilty for taking the kind of credit that we were given in 1991 and 92.
Didn't G.W. Bush say that the success of Gulf War I would put the shame or strain or whatever it was in Vietnam to rest? That he was so proud of the victory, this 48-day victory.
Yeah, that is what he said, yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, now, like a lot of vets that come back, I hid out for a long time. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. When I enlisted, I intended on a 20-year enlistment. I actually asked my recruiter for a 20-year piece of paper. My father was a lifer, his father, I mean, serious military family. And I, you know, I was in ROTC at Portland State for 3 years, dropped out my junior year to enlist. And, okay, there's been a bit of a perspective shift over the years. But, you know, at the end of that war, I was decided, you know, and that was before I got sick. I'd already decided that I wasn't going to re-up. And then I got sick. And they still didn't know officially what the hell was wrong with me when my term of enlistment came up. So then the VA started picking me up. And officially, they still don't know what's wrong with me. But when I got out in '93, I did pursue the disability claim because it was the only way I was going to get any medical care. And I got it by act of Congress. I hid out, just like Colleen was talking about. I hid out. I tried to be normal. I even wore khaki. I mean, I tried to be normal for years, and it's just not me. And then, well, my activism really started when I saw a Newsweek cover in late '98, early '99 that had a split screen of Jeb Bush and George Bush, asking which would be the Republican frontrunner in 2000. And I said, oh no. We get either one of those guys in office, we're going back to Iraq right away. And I said that in, it was like December '98 that cover was out. That's when I started getting active. I was like, I can't hide under a rock anymore. That's a rock. And of course I was right. Then the next generation came around. And in 2002, people were coming to me because I was one of the most recent vets. And I spoke out. And my first time speaking out was standing on a park bench in the North Park blocks up here with no amplification. And Ted Kaiser standing with a cell phone so his wife could hear. And I spoke out as much as I could in 2000, 2003, 2004. And then people started coming back. Some of them actually sought me out. Mike Hoffman found me online 6 months before he formed IVAW with the others. And he found me online and told me his story. And so I'm actually the oldest member of IVAW, even though now it's honorary. Because I did not they changed the rules, but so I can't renew my membership, but I am still an honorary member of IVAW because I was the first one of my generation to join. And I feel a strong affinity with the next generation of vets because it's the same damn war. I also feel some separation because I've actually heard some of them say, Jesus Christ, if you had finished your job, we wouldn't be here. It's like, depends on how you interpret what the job was, depends on this, but frankly, hey, it wasn't my call anyway. And, but at the same time, there's not that much of an age difference between, like, Mike Hoffman is 11 years younger than me. Adrian is considerably younger than me, but my daughter's now, she'll be 19 in a couple weeks. My children's generation is starting to get to that age. In fact, an ex-boyfriend of my daughter's is in Iraq right now.
So what happens is that the relationship shifts. You know, sometimes
Yes.
it's close to affinity, and sometimes it's pretty hostile.
And now it's come to kind of mentorship for me.
But part of the reason we're talking about that is that's not entirely mutual, and I think it's a good time to let the next generation talk about it. There are barriers, and they're not for us to say what they are, and I'm interested in how you perceive them.
Well, my story, I don't know, I still feel a little bit of disconnect between all of this, in a way, and then in a certain way I don't. My stepfather is a Vietnam vet, and I remember when I introduced the idea of me joining the military, he was excited about me joining because, according to him, you know, it was the right thing to do. I was being patriotic. I was doing the right thing. And he never shared he shared stories about Vietnam, but it was all positive. He was there to do the right thing. And again, like Colleen's father, you know, whatever the president calls you to do, you do it. When I told him that I was having doubts about actually going to Iraq, that I was thinking about resisting, he, you know, said, well, you can't question, you know, your commander-in-chief, you have to do what he tells you to do. And at that time I was like, okay, like it didn't make sense to me that he would be telling that to his own daughter. And yet he did say, you know, if I could go for you, I would. But then I got to meet other veterans from Vietnam War who had a totally different experience, or maybe not experience, but just outlook. And that's when I started to feel a little bit more like, okay, I'm not alone in this, thinking that, you know, I don't want to go to Iraq. Do I have to go? Not just because the president says that we have orders to go, that doesn't mean that I have to go. I still have, you know, the right to make my own decision for myself, regardless of whatever contract I supposedly signed. And so, again, like, you know, with the other veterans from other wars, yeah, completely, I honestly don't have, you know, any type of connection, because I don't know, because we weren't taught this stuff, you know, in school, or because I wasn't around them, because my father he never shared anything either. But with with your generation, again, same thing, like, I just felt like I was isolated from all of this until I got the orders to go to Iraq. And then I started to seek out people. And like he said, you know, the soldiers that are there right now, they're there fighting the same war, and they've been there. They haven't left. They've always been there. There's just a lot more now. And so I'm just trying to, because I see myself one day, like, being on that end of the panel, you know, talking to people who are, you know, fighting. It's going to happen. It's going to happen, and it's really, really sad to think that. But I do see myself over there, and I know my children want to be here in my situation. But yeah, I don't know what I was going to say.
I think I sense that there is at least some degree of solidarity among your generation, among the people that are serving.
Because of them, because of the veterans that I got to speak with, talk to, learn about, hear their stories, because of them, there was no way that I could deploy to Iraq. Knowing what I knew, knowing the things that they had to do, the things that they saw, there was just no way that I could, go with my conscience, like intact. I couldn't participate in that, even knowing that I was against it and being there. Just the fact that I would have been there, I couldn't. And so a lot of it has a lot to do with the veterans that I got to speak. Dan Shea was the first Vietnam vet that I got to talk to and just, have a chat with and just talk about normal things. And so he is the one who actually connected me to the current Iraq veterans, because my unit, there was no way that they were letting us talk to the people who we were supposed to replace. And we asked them, we're like, can we talk to them so we know what to expect? Just ask questions. No way at all whatsoever. And so it just so happened that, veterans here that were organizing were inviting current vets to talk to people, and I happened to be around and really need at that time of wanting to get more information, because I didn't want to go in there just thinking, my order said Operation Iraqi Freedom, and I just stared at that and I'm like, how can it just, no.
I want to ask a question. It's pretty clear, I think, from what you said, that a personal relationship and connection is something that causes that shift to begin to create some trust with the previous generation. How did that happen for you? Somebody that you really didn't know, Dan and others, somebody that's a stranger became, entered that space, and somewhere that shifted into a safe place, a comfort zone.
Yeah, I was full of questions, and I was never judged. I was never told, well, why did you join in the military to begin with? Why did you join when, you knew this was going to happen? You knew you were going to get called up. So I think that's something that really helped, because I did get that a lot from people who weren't veterans, who always told me, well, you knew you were going to get called up. Why did you join? Why don't you just go? They've been training you to go. They've been training you to go there and fight for our freedom. Why don't you just do it? So I didn't receive any of that negativity, any of that harassment from the veterans. So that's why I felt like, okay, these are a group of people that I can truly feel comfortable with, and hopefully be able to build something out of it. And so that really, really helped a lot. And so I hope. And I think that's another thing too with the Iraq veterans that are coming back right now. They were really eager. As soon as they found out that I had orders to go, and I was kind of questioning whether to go or not, they were like, we want to talk to her, we want to reach out to her, and so that really helped a lot. It wasn't, and nobody ever told me don't go. They just said, this is what I went through, and this is what I'm going through now, because it's not just what happened there, but what's happening here. A lot of them are homeless, a lot of them are trying to get by, a lot of them are depressed, a lot of things. So that's definitely what helped the most.
Thank you. I want to suggest that I think that for all of us, at some stage there was that shift where there were people that you really didn't know if you could trust, and you entered that space that now you can become part of what's becoming a solution to the problem. That barrier went away, and it sounds like for you, Sean, it was maybe a slightly lower threshold.
Well, for me, the strong link that I started to feel with Vietnam vets honestly came in 2003. With the invasion of Iraq in March of that year, I collapsed at work, on the floor, soggy puddle. And next day I was at a demonstration here in town, and once again I stepped up and I spoke out, and I was really a vet on the edge. And there were 4 Vietnam vets, 3 of them in this room, that caught me. And They saved my life. And they allowed me to continue raising my kids.
And I think I might add that allowed you to reach out and work with others.
Yeah, and now 5 years later, it's my turn.
Which is what is happening as we move back down the chain here. I think everybody has cited some political awareness as part of the thing that brought them over that threshold into trusting the people of the previous conflicts and thinking that they might have some credibility and something to offer. I know you did, Colleen. Were there other things that made that a safe place to go to that now you are?
Well,
now you're they?
It was from other veterans, and like you said, some of them are in this room. And, it was because of other veterans that I found out that that there are ways to get help, and you don't have to just keep everything bottled up. And by speaking and by reaching out to other veterans, it pretty much saved my life too, and my husband's life. And now I just feel like to be able to reach out to any young people that are now going through that, so that they don't have to just hide out for 30 years and be ashamed of participating in a war that isn't the right thing, to be ashamed of it. I mean, no one should have to feel that way. No one should have to feel that because they did what they thought was right at the time, that they aren't a hero for participating in it, even if it was just the wrong thing. And so if we can just get this new generation to not be afraid and not to hide out for half their lives, and it'll just be this this rolling stone, and it'll just keep moving. And I wrote something a while back that for this piece, and it was just this one line of it that they don't always want to talk about, but like, what if they decide to have a war, and we all just sit down and say, no, you go fight this motherfucking war.
I'd like to ask Bill and Ed a question that has to do with that threshold, and they I think it sounds as if they hit the deck plates running, as we used to say in the Navy. They came out of service and were immediately in opposition to the war culture and that sort of thing. They pretty much said that. But what that presupposes is something that's even scarier, which is they not only broke with the previous generation, but probably with much of their own generation.
Yeah, that's very true. Actually, the period between 1945 and 1950 was preoccupied by the growth of the anti-communist movement and the anti-labor movement in this country. When I got out of the service, I went back to my old job as a labor organizer and as a student at the university. And our preoccupation was communism and the fight against the anti-red movement, and an attempt to just organize the working class. And being a veteran was not very important in our life and the life of those around us. We were actually, I was kind of ashamed of my service. And I didn't make any point of it for a long time.
Did you feel that way, Bill?
I have made this statement a number of times now. The veterans, all the veterans in this room owe a great deal to the Vietnam veterans and the courage they showed when they stood up and said, God damn it, you really messed us up. Now you're going to take care of us, and you're going to compensate us, and you're going to provide us with the medical care we need. That didn't happen at the end of World War II, and it didn't happen at the end of the Korean War. But I joined the Northwest Veterans for Peace, which is another group anyhow, because I felt something in common with them. They were opposed to the damn war, and I was too. And we were sitting around at a lunch meeting one time when I was working. I was a Teamster working out of the union, and I was talking about what a horrible mess this was, this war in Vietnam. And the boxer, what was his name? Refused to go. Yeah. And I was singing his praises. I said, there's a courageous man. And they wanted to throw me off the loading dock. It wasn't a popular position, but I felt a commonality with these guys that were marching in the street in opposition to that stupid war.
Thank you. I want to shift a little bit. Marion's telling me 5 minutes, and what we're really up against is dinner next, right?
Well, we're going to have a report from winners and cooker, but I think we'll wait until after dinner for that.
Okay, I think we're kind of midstream here. Is it okay if we go on?
Yeah. Make it till 5.
Dinner's not till 6. Okay, we can make the time back up. There's one other component of this that I'd really like to talk about and give everybody a chance to weigh in on. In terms of creating that threshold shift, in terms of making this a safe place, making veteran-to-veteran affinity, as we've talked about, has happened in various ways with varying levels of success, I would like to suggest that we consider 2 ways that happens. To use military terminology, there's some things that are strategic. You know, who can we be in the long term to create a space for the new generation of vets to join with us in the work that we're doing, and for us to offer them what we have to offer. And there are tactical things. You know, tactical things are, I think of as the techniques, the ideas that we've tried. I've heard in informal conversations over the last couple of days, there are some people that have had some things that have worked and some people that have had some things that didn't. Somebody in the chapter reports, please forgive me for not remembering which chapter it was, talked about setting up a coffee house so that the Iraq and Afghanistan vets could come and say, I'm all screwed up, help me fix it, you know, and that was not successful, and perhaps we can speculate on why that was, but it just didn't work. I've heard some stories of other things that were perhaps a little more indirect, that it sounds like are working and are making, you know, lowering those thresholds and bringing the different generations of vets together. So first, maybe if we can start at this end of the table, considering that the differences between the generations are a given. What can we do strategically? How can we listen? How can we place ourselves? How can we create long-term things to make it more possible to have connections between the older generation? I realize that your experience, you were brought right into a connection with the older generation, but I'm asking you to speak for also the other folks that you served with that are not able, for one reason or another, to answer for themselves today.
Well, again, like this is all kind of new, but I don't know. When we were talking earlier, we were talking about an idea of reaching out to the soldiers who are here at Fort Lewis, the ones who are coming back, constantly leaving and coming back from Iraq, and reaching out to them right there. I myself don't really have that much access or communication with the other soldiers. The people that I was going to deploy with are still gone. They're not going to be back until October of this year. But definitely, there's a reserve base in Vancouver. That's the one where I was stationed at. I know that there's one there. I know that there's another reserve one in North Portland. So I know that there's all these little bases, and maybe starting to, you know, go to those places and taking flyers, information, just even, you know, phone numbers about where they can call to get information, the GI Rights Hotline, Courage to Resist. There's a lot of help out there, or even, you know, inviting them to a meeting where they can not necessarily go to a meeting to speak, but just to go to a meeting to be exposed to what it can be like to be around other veterans. Stuff like that, I think, would really be beneficial.
I think what I hear is figure out what you can do locally.
Well, yeah,
and
for me,
set the structures in place for that.
For me, that's you know, all I can do is locally and start getting more involved with the Veterans for Peace chapter here. And I have contact with the veteran Tina, who I'm still in contact with her. But again, like she feels like she's been not ignored, but I think she actually even did it for herself, for her own good for now, just to kind of isolate herself. But see, I don't know if that's, you know, her way of coping with it, because I know that she needs, a lot of veterans need us to reach out to them and not necessarily force them, but just to remind them, you know, here's a safe place where you can go, because those problems, issues are not going to go away. They're always going to be there. And I think the sooner that we help each other deal with them, the better it'll be, you know, in the long run. So, yes.
Thank you. I heard a statistic on the radio the other day. I can't substantiate it, but the roughly, what was it, 6 weeks you've served on the ground?
Yeah.
The length of that short little war, that we pay $4.3 billion a month in disability payments for those 6 weeks.
Yeah, an accompanying statistic with that would be to take a look at disability rates among Vietnam veterans, which was around 11 to 13%, and disability rates of Gulf War vets. These are VA statistics. 28%.
I think that's bumped up. I think it's...
well, yeah, last time I checked, that was 4 years ago, so it's of course higher now. 28%.
Anyway, so strategically, what do you think is a good way to lower those thresholds and barriers?
Strategically, I think you want, it's kind of along the lines of what Adriano was saying, with a touch of the cliched, think globally, act locally. And not just simply think organizationally, but think personally. Okay? I have contact with veterans under 35 almost every day. Definitely every week. And we talk. We talk one-on-one. As one friend of mine, she's a Kosovo vet, and she's married to an ex-infantryman. And the three of us get together and talk. And not always the most fun conversations of the week, but always the most worthwhile. And as Adriana was saying about her first conversations with Dan Shea, the big key is to just listen. Just listen. You don't even have to ask questions unless they stop talking. You know? And we had a workshop here today about organizational and coalition trust. That trust starts on the personal level. And people aren't going to trust you if they think you have ulterior motives about listening to them. So maybe you have to look inside too. Figure out what your motives are in wanting to talk to a 25-year-old vet. Is your motive to wrangle somebody new into the movement? Or is your motive to take care of a human being? Think about that. And honestly, If your motive is to wrangle a new 25-year-old energetic person into the movement, stay home. That's how I felt when I got out. I'm sure it's how you felt. If your motive is to use me for some other purpose, stay home. But if your motive is to help me or just to listen to me, that's the personal trust that starts to get established. And then accept what comes of it. You've made a new friend, great. Is that friend going to be an activist? Who knows? It doesn't matter. Some of them will, some of them won't. But question your own motives in even talking about this, and even having this conversation. You know, and that might be a little heavy-handed, but that's my piece.
Thanks, Sean. In the years after 1975, I think the same conversation existed. If you were talking about Vietnam and something was wrong with you, you were screwed up, I think. Would you agree with that?
Would you explain what you...
Well, I'm referring back to the notion of that, the coffee house idea.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that if you need to talk to somebody about it, if you're not perfectly fine in getting on with your life and something's wrong with you, it's your problem.
Yeah.
And, you know, do you think that's a component of why people shut up and try to keep going? And if so, then what could have been different, and how might we model our long-term strategy, our approach to making a welcoming place for vets?
Well, I think because of the whole stigma that's kind of going on, probably with the new generation, that, well, if they speak out at all about that they're questioning the war, then, you know, well, then they're not patriotic. Or if they seem like they need help because of what they experience there, well, you know, then they're a weakling, or they're, you know, they're not, you know, a macho super soldier if they are experiencing some negative effects from it. And so if there's some way we can just convey that, well, just that it's more normal to experience what they're experiencing. It is more normal to have lasting negative feelings about it and suffer PTSD because of it. That is normal. To experience that and be all right with it and not have any repercussions from it, that's not normal. I mean, if we can have that, give them that sense of, you know, it's all right to be screwed up now, but there are things you can do about it to not deal with it, but to deal with it in a positive way, and just this reaching out and to find these people so that they aren't just holed up somewhere and committing suicide, which is happening right and left. I mean, if there's some way we can find these people and just bring them into our...
Bill, one thing I'm thinking about... Thank you. I want to ask one more question here, at least. One thing I'm thinking about is not only did you serve in a war, but you also had an experience that I think the modern vets, practically all of them have, which is you were exposed to something terribly toxic that you, I think, probably figured out pretty quickly you were going to carry around inside you for the rest of your life.
Yes.
And the parallel, of course, I draw is to depleted uranium. And again, I think that's an issue of now, if you have to talk about that, then you're sort of admitting that you are toxic, you know. So in terms of our long-term strategy, I mean, I think that's an important element of the young generation of vets now, is they've been exposed to things that we don't even know what are, and will carry with them for the rest of their lives. We can be pretty certain about that. How can we listen? How can we create a space for that to be okay?
Well, the big change I see over my lifetime, in my experience in World War II, was that there was no concept of trauma in World War II. If a soldier displayed any kind of a reaction to his experiences, it was charged up to a personality defect. And for example, a person who was experiencing any kind of mental disorder was put on the coal pile in Europe as a punishment for being a slacker. And the big change in the medics came with Vietnam. I think because of both troops and their isolation from the public. We had a basic support of the public during World War II. But with Vietnam, there was a massive opposition to the war, and the military was looked down upon, and that carried over, I think, to the formation of the various peace groups. I know that in my experience as a labor organizer, the kind of awareness that we encountered in the working class as we formed them into unions was that their service in the military became more important after Vietnam. Whereas before, they would hide it like I did. You didn't talk about it very much because it wasn't very honorable. You were in a war and you were drafted for the most part. Very few volunteers in World War II. As opposed to Vietnam, which I don't recall the percentage of volunteers in Vietnam, but it was much higher than it was in World War II.
Thanks, Ed. Last word quickly to you, Bill.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm beginning to take a little hope in is that the public is becoming aware of the effect of this goddamn war on their standard of living, and is putting them out of their houses. And they're beginning to understand what's taking place. That the billions that we dump into a place like Iraq is taking food out of the mouths of people right here in this country, that kids are sleeping in the back of automobiles because they don't have enough money for a decent place to live. And I'm beginning to see some reference to that, and I'm heartened by that, because when the people become aware of the long-range effects, or even the short-range effects of this war, or any war for that matter, they will begin to understand our opposition to it. And I would like to think that we are not going to be held in the thrall of that bunch in the White House. We are able to maybe think for ourselves instead of that donkey brain. It's just criminal, and he's made a speech the other day where everything is fine, and Petraeus, or what is it? Petraeus was saying just the opposite in the next room. So, you know, if the public is informed, they'll make the right decision.
Thank you, Bill.
When I have a point of order for a World War I disabled vet, the leg of this gentleman, my father.
Absolutely.
You know, the World War I vets knew they were screwed. And when Eisenhower and MacArthur and Nixon came out and ran them out of D.C., they knew they were screwed. And in the middle of the war, about 1943, They went down and they took over the hotel in Washington, D.C., and they said, you're not going to screw our kids like they did us. And so they got the GI Bill of Rights through. And this is what we should be doing now for these new kids coming up, putting in the new GI Bill. And the other thing is that at the same time, there was no VA system. You got your disability increased. But my father was a part of the disabled vets that created the VA system. And he did it on behalf of his father, who served in the Philippines, who came home disabled, and whose father, and my grandfather's father, within the Civil War, Union Navy, lost the sea, etc. All those guys are just like you, Sean. I got the same ridiculous money.
They're all sitting there. I regret that we don't have time for questions and answers. I think we're going to have to wrap this up. But thank you for listening. I hope that somewhere in there are some ideas about how we can go forward with an open and welcoming space to the people on that end of the table. Thank you.
One of our members used to say, if World War I was the war to end all wars, why did they give it a number? And I hear people referring now to World War III, because this conflagration that we got involved in is likely to spread.
That's right, and you can just lay that something up tonight, and everybody directly relates.
To have a report back from one soldier. To have a report back from one soldier, is 6 months years for